What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Spike Week podcast show. I never know what to call it, right? Because we're on YouTube, but it goes to a podcast feed. We always just call it a podcast, I guess. But Spike Week, we had a special guest today. I'm super pumped that we were able to put this together. Scott Barrett from Fantasy Points is here with us, and he wrote. I shared it on Twitter before we started this show. He wrote an absolutely incredible kind of like manifesto of everything you need to know about best ball. So I'm excited to pick his brain a little bit on that, and just a bunch of other topics. But anyway, Scott, thank you for joining me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Erik. Thanks for having me on. Apologies in advance if I'm a little rusty. Like you said, this was the first article I did the entire off season. Did it March 8th. But it's still very relevant. It was one of those, you can look back at it throughout the entire offseason. It's always going to be relevant. I don't think anything from it's outdated. I was telling you before the show, I was anticipating playing like 100 or 150 best ball leagues this year. I've done that before, but for whatever reason, I just timed out my first 5 or so drafts, and I haven't looked back at it, but yeah, always happy to talk best ball. That was one of my first loves in fantasy, and I feel both of us have a pretty good grasp on the strategy that goes into it.
Yeah, reading. I hadn't read until we talked earlier this week. I hadn't read your piece, and so like you said, we were talking a little bit before the show, and it was just so funny because I actually don't go as in depth like as you did on my like personal, like standalone research, but I'm using, I'm being lazy. I'm using people like you. I'm using people like Mike Leone, Beers, all these different smart people. And you just start to see all the data, all the kind of insights, the takeaways people are having from whether it be past data or how can we kind of manipulate the field moving forward. All these smart people started landing on all the same things. And so I'm just like, I was just reading, and just nodding my head along as I'm reading that. So if anybody wants to go check that out, I highly, even if you've been playing a lot, listening to a lot of content, there was even things that just were like, whether they were great refreshers for me or kind of new insights that I thought were great. So to your point about, maybe not playing as much best ball as you kind of planned to, at least up until this point, one big thing that I think people don't take into account is you think best ball is fantasy football. That's what people think. Right. And fantasy football is just fantasy football. And you're playing in a little bit more like managed leagues, but you obviously have the best ball expertise. So there anything, like big key takeaways between like a high stakes managed league versus how you're approaching best ball that you would kind of, your main big advice?
Yeah, really, I think they're just two completely different games where you have to have two completely different strategies. The optimal strategy is going to be different in one, and then sometimes diametrically opposed in the other. I do think best ball is easily the most profitable, most exploitable format in fantasy, so long as you're not like timing out multiple times in a draft. Like, you should just clean up and dominate. Drafting the right positions is just as important as drafting the right players. I'm in a start-sit league, a typical ESPN 10 team or an FFPC high stakes 12 team. My strategy is usually bell cow or bust with the running backs. Typically go RB to start. But in a best ball, I think that's fairly suboptimal. I lean far more towards zero RB or modified zero RB. I do think that's the optimal strategy in best ball. And it just makes sense. Like in a start-sit league, you want those dependable every week starters. A Nyheim Hines or a JD McKissick isn't at all valuable because you're you're never going to start them in the right weeks. But in a best ball, those two running backs are massively valuable. You just get their boom games, their spike weeks, and they'll give you an Aaron Jones type, like mid-range RB1 production. So that's so important, and it's so valuable. And it's a lot easier to go quantity over quality there. In a start sit league, I'm very late round QB. Typically, it's a onesie position. You could stream your way to QB 8 levels of production.
Right.
But there's no waiver wire to fall back on. There's no safety net of the waiver wire. And so I will prioritize quarterbacks significantly more in best ball than I would in a start sit. So there's all these sort of wrinkles and different things that come into play. One of my other big articles this offseason was Upside Wins Championships. And basically, like throughout the whole thing, there's like a throwaway line towards the end where it's like, but this has nothing to do with best ball. In best ball, like completely different, Upside Wins Championships in a start sit league. In best ball, you can definitely get by or win or dominate grabbing a bunch of ADP beaters who don't have that massive, power law type upside that just is you're so much more dominant than the next 2 or 3 closest players.
That's such an interesting. So both of those things you kind of brought up are so interesting. I thought the Nyheim Hines McKissick thing was like super powerful, even for me who like subscribes to everything that you just talked about. Like that's how I draft, right? 0 RB, modified 0 RB, whatever you want to anchor, hero, whatever the hell the name of the week is for that strategy. That's like been my typical approach. And even when you kind of put it that way, like people are like, dude, Aaron Jones was whatever he was, RB4 last year or whatever. He was a league winner. And then he was. But like in managed, and I do think people maybe even, it was an interesting take basically that, 0 RB is more powerful and managed. Some people will say, because I can pick guys up, right? However, you kind of made that point that you still have to be able to decide when to start them, like having Nyheim Hines and knowing when to start him, his points in best ball, it's like, I don't really care when they come, right? I'm just going to get them. I'm always going to get those spikes when he provides them. And then hopefully maybe on the week that he doesn't do it, JD McKissick does it, or I got an injury, right? Zeke misses that week and I get Tony Pollard, right? So you're just hoping it all kind of fits together and you don't have to sweat it. But in managed, it's like, yes, the ability to pick people up is nice, but you still have to be able to decide when to start these people. And you have to get, if Myles Gaskin comes up on the waiver wire, you still have to win, that bid for Myles Gaskin. So it is such a unique, very, very different thing. And I thought your take on it with that, like I can find Aaron Jones with Nyheim Hines and JD McKissick was like a really powerful way to put that.
Yeah. So just like in the article I talk about, we have access to ESPN's start sit percentage data. And so Nyheim Hines like killed you last year if you owned him. He was never started in more than 47% of the time in any given week, but he averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game in his 5 least started games, and then 7.1 in all of his other games played. So you just like never got him right. And we see that time and time again. And that's why in Upside Wins Championships, talking about start sit, I do like severely neglect the committee running backs. So like the workhorse running backs who are going to be massively game script dependent, they're going to need positive game script to hit, or the scat backs who are like, Tariq Cohen, James White, where they need negative game script. They need pass heavy scripts to hit, but they're going to be so inconsistent. They're going to be so week to week volatile. But in best ball, that sort of volatility is a good thing. You want those boom games and those duds, where those duds are just automatically benched for you and those boom games are automatically started for you. Whereas like in a start sit league, those guys are going to drive you crazy. But yeah, in the article I talked about, so if you treated Hines and McKissick, 2 guys who are like, round 12, round 19 ADP, together they combined just taking the highest scoring week of the 2 each week, and neglecting flex production. So it's just just treating them as one player in best ball, which you can. They scored a combined 275 fantasy points,
Jesus.
which ranked 4th among all running backs. It was behind only Kamara, Dalvin, and Derrick Henry. So, really, and people get this wrong all the time in best ball. Running back is so massively overdrafted in a start-sit league. Like, yes, freaking 15 of the top 24 picks need to be running backs, maybe even more than that. But in a best ball, no, I don't think so. I think definitely not. Like James White right now is one of the best values in all of best ball leagues. Raheem Mostert, one of the best picks you could make. Those guys, like, they could legitimately kill you in a start-sit, but they're great best ball picks.
Yeah, those are great. I'm going to get killed by Davis Maddock for allowing you to talk about James White, because I've made fun of him for drafting James White so much, which is also funny because I've actually drafted a fair bit of James White, but we've turned this into a bit somehow. But I mean, I just couldn't agree more. And I think, what do you think about the fact that you kind of pointed this out too in this conversation and in the article, that like it's not about avoiding the high-end running backs, because I still, there's a handful of those guys that have this, like Pat Crane would call it, legendary season, this legendary upside that is just unmatched at the position, right? We just talked about how you can get an RB1 between these cheap guys, if you happen to hit on the right combination, but you can't get Christian McCaffrey, right? Yeah. You can't get that. So I want that guy, right? I want the Christian McCaffrey, but I don't want to then compound all these really high value, assets in my draft at running back, trying to lock up all those spots, because it's like, I mean, what's the dream, right? You get Christian McCaffrey, and then you get the scenario that you just outlined. Now just give me McKissick and James White, and I'm not losing points at the RB2 spot. I have the number 1 player in fantasy, and then I just am dominating at all those other positions.
Yeah. So optimal is very clearly, and again, it depends on if this is what type of league and scoring system. But optimal is, like, in a traditional league, is very clearly RB to start and then neglect the running back position far more than you think is okay. Like running back to start, and then maybe don't wait until round 7, round 8 to draft your RB2. That's fairly optimal. Or Travis Kelce to start. They're about even in terms of win rate. And just the argument there is, like, what a freaking cheat code Travis Kelce was last year, but also, like, typical highest scoring tight end in a given year. And ADP has been fairly consistent with that. Travis Kelce's been tight end 1 for 4 straight seasons. And then it was either Ertz or Waller for the past, 5 years. But just the value he gave you was so obscene. So just him alone, eating the bye week, outscored the tight end 3, tight end 4, and tight end 5 combined. No bye week, taking the highest score every single week. And, like, that is just insane. So the value there is, you could just draft Travis Kelce, and then you can take, like, a Cole Kmet in the last round of your draft, and you're just good at the tight end position. Kmet, maybe you'll have a few weeks in the flex for you. And so you draft only 2, save you draft capital there, whereas someone else could get, potentially Kittle, Pitts, Hawkinson, and they're not going to outscore you. And that's so much more draft capital. And it's also 3 picks on one position, where you'll have only 2 picks on one position. So you can, shore up another position that might be a little bit weaker. You could get more, another wide receiver or running back, whatever.
What do you think about that? Obviously, you kind of outlined Kelce, but what do you think about, I think the common, and maybe misconception, maybe not, I'm not sure, we can talk about it, is in terms of modified 0 RB, it's like, I got to take that running back in the first round, right? Because they are stronger bets. Mm-hmm. But it's like, once you get, especially this year, so maybe like really focusing kind of in on this year, I think it's a little more of an interesting conversation, because I think there's a fairly clear 1-2 with Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook. And then there's a tier after them that you can make very strong cases for, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, etc. But you can also make some fairly strong bear cases against all of those guys. So I think it's a little more interesting this year with something like Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill or Stephon Diggs or whatever, and then jumping to one of these second round running backs. Like people are sick of me talking about Antonio Gibson, but pick your flavor of second round running back and just altering that strategy that we know is optimal. And so now, like you said, if I can get the Kelce advantage and I can find the breakout star in the second round and get the perks of this, what we know is a really powerful, roster construction. Have you thought about that, kind of twisting that construction a little bit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, I have Travis Kelce well above any other wide receiver. And I think Darren Waller too. Like, I'm dangerously high on Darren. He needs to be, I don't know, maybe you could take Adams, Tyreek, Diggs over him, but that's about it. If that's the case. And then even then it's like, if you wanted to take him over any of those wide, like, I get the argument. I just it makes a lot of sense. Again, preserving that draft capital, taking more of a quantity over quality approach, the wide receiver position. But yeah, so you brought up Antonio Gibson, who's like definitely one of my guys. I absolutely love him. I think he has massive upside. I think he has McCaffrey-esque upside. I think he has 2016, 2017 David Johnson type upside. I really could see him being a league winner. And I just dropped my big running back article, the Bell Cow Report. And again, that's a very much start-sit oriented article. But it talks about all the reasons why I like him. And then a few days after, we have an insider on staff, an NFL insider, who said Gibson's going to be, like, he's confirmed with the coaches, Gibson is going to take a lot of work from J.D. McKissic, which just like really opens up the pathway to him being an absolute league winner. But like what I do in best ball is like, so I think he's one of the best picks you can make in the second round of a start-sit league. But in a best ball, I'm very much more safety oriented. I really think I could just outdraft someone drafting the right positions and clean up. Like, you give me 100 to 150 leagues and there's no timeouts, there's no way I'll profit. And I see myself profiting massively. And so it's just one of those things where, like, Gibson in a best ball, like, again, I think he could be a league winner. It's just like, I'm just so much more safety oriented, where it's like, maybe I'll just grab like the guaranteed production and just, hit the right guys later. I don't know. It's a trickier thing, but it goes back to best ball versus start sit, where in a start sit, upside is so much more attractive. Risk isn't too serious of a concern. And in the best ball, it's kind of the opposite.
The really interesting thing about that is, I think because we haven't seen, well, first of all, like, especially this new best ball space that we're in, right? With Underdog and DraftKings is in, and there's even some new sites popping up in the $1 million to first contest. Like, we've never seen this before. And even in managed leagues and even in some past best ball contests, no one really does zero RB, right? It's kind of like, I think about it in DFS. We were brought up DFS before we hopped on. It's like, if a running back is 85% owned in a contest, he can be on the winning lineup and not be optimal. You actually still should have faded him. It's just there's such a massive amount of that guy lineups with that guy that they were able to stumble across the nuts around him. And I kind of think that's how it is, with teams that are not zero RB, or maybe even not modified zero RB, because that's just how people's brains work, right? We always make the joke, like, if you screenshot your team on Twitter and it has a bunch of early round running backs, everybody's going to love that team because they love to be able to see, I have guaranteed starters in that lineup. I don't love to see Nyheim Hines and J.D. McKissic and have to do the mental gymnastics about how that team ends up actually being really good. And so there's this idea that zero RB is something that it isn't. It is actually, to your point, safe, like much safer, a much safer way to draft because of the bust rates on running backs. and you just have all these bankable points, and you never have to worry about when to put them in your lineup, and you're winning the flex. You're always winning the flex, and so you just have this really safe team. But we haven't seen a zero RB team win one of these tournaments before, and so I feel like people think that like, oh, it's never going to win because it hasn't won it before. But like, we just need the 1 year, right, where like you get the JD McKissick and Hines, and those guys get you far enough, and then when you get to the playoff weeks, you get Zeke goes down, or Dalvin goes down, or whatever, and you happen to hit on that right combination, and now it does have the upside, right? We're playing in such a game of small samples that we haven't been able to see it totally work. So I don't think people believe in it. But how do you feel about that? Like, your article is based on a lot of historical data. How are you factoring in some of that sometimes that like, at the end of the day, all NFL, all fantasy football data is fairly small sample. Like, how do you kind of weigh all those different factors?
Yeah. So if you're doing zero RB in a start sit, you're just drafting suboptimally. You need to just go back and like look at the research. It's not akin to drafting, a kicker in round 3, but it's maybe like drafting a kicker in like round 7 or round 6. It's just definitely not optimal. It's worked 1 year over the past 15 years in 2015. And like, that was about it. And last year was the second best year ever for zero RB. And it still, was not optimal.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, and like looking at you mentioned the bus rates, looking at the bus rates, it's not going to tell you anything, because in a start sit league, it's all about having the right 2 or 3 guys. It's not having enough ADP beaters or like slight values. It really, like, how many players in any given season actually matter. The number is like shockingly low. It's somewhere between 4 and 15. 2 years ago, it was McCaffrey, Lamar Jackson, and maybe 3 other names. And like that. Right. And so, but in a best ball, again, it's about getting the right positions. It's about getting a high number of ADP beaters, like, guys who beat out their expectation. You don't need to, I mean, like Christian McCaffrey, Lamar Jackson certainly helped you a ton 2 years ago, but like not as exaggerated as in a start sit league. And so, you were saying bust rates. That ignores the massive upside, the massive league winning upside. Like the power, fantasy football operates on a power law distribution where it's just these relatively few just absolutely dominate. But no, in a best ball, like you said, it is the safer route typically. And so that does matter in a best ball. Zero RB is far more optimal. My go-to and start sit is bell cow or bust, typically RB, maybe RB to start, but that is not optimal. That's not even close to optimal. In a best ball, typically I want to go tight Kelsey with my first pick, or a high-end RB with my first pick, ideally that, and then neglect running back for a while. That's pretty optimal. But yeah, zero RB, as I showed in the article, that can work too. It's just not as great as getting a Dalvin or a Henry or McCaffrey, whoever. But
it is so interesting. Like, that's what I like. I actually really enjoy talking about kind of managed leagues, even like listening to people talk about dynasty or like even like super flex, right? Talking about all the different formats and kind of marrying it up to best ball, because they're such stark differences that people don't really realize how different they are. And like, you start to think like, actually, I've been treating this a little bit more like managed. And then I need somebody like you to come on and be like, you need to treat them like 2 totally different games. Right. And so but you can also have like takeaways on, okay, this works in managed, or this is like how I approach my dynasty thing, but there's maybe some thought processes I can draw away from that. So that's why I was like excited to bring you on, because you kind of have this expertise across all of it, where I'm not, I'm entirely best ball focused. So that was going to be the next thing I was going to ask is
yes.
What's like, is there a takeaway that you've kind of brought from managed, even though you're treating them separately? Is there something you were like, I really need to apply this to best ball, or I guess the opposite way too?
Yeah, I just say if you're a best ball player, just read my best ball primer and strategy guide. Like, it took weeks and weeks and weeks. But I literally wrote it so that you could just read this, and then there's no way you're not going to profit in best ball. Like I really think it's the easiest, most exploitable, most profitable. Just read that and don't time out in your leagues, and I think you're going to dominate. But yeah, so my big article that came out just a few weeks ago, Upside Wins Championships, is like a deep sort of philosophical dive. It was sort of like a self-indulgent piece, but I had a lot of fun. Maybe my PhD dissertation on how to dominate start-sit leagues. And so that came out of me playing 200 best ball leagues 2 or 3 years ago and dominating, but not doing as great in my start-sit leagues. And what happened was, this can happen if you play in multiple leagues. What happened was like, okay, I killed the best ball because I like drafted for safety. I got a bunch of ADP beaters, but I didn't do shit in my start-sit leagues because like I didn't have the right 2 or 3 guys who massively smashed their expectations.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have the right running backs. Like in a start-sit league, like running back is the most important, most valuable position by a landslide. And so like to me, right from that moment, like I hate losing. It was, I need to, there's a fundamental difference between these two formats. And so I've spent a great deal of time trying to breaking those down. This year it was, write this big best ball manifesto. Next year, it'll be a deep dive into dynasty, optimal startup approach. But that's the great thing about fantasy is like you have all these different fun formats and they're so different and they're all like their own games within a game. And so like you could have a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who is a redraft sell, a dynasty buy. You get J.K. Dobbins, who's like a best ball buy, a redraft start sit sell. And, so I play dynasty, which is so much fun in February, March, April. And then don't really think about it too much. DFS, which is like, all I care about during the season. Best ball, which is like so much fun now, but it doesn't take any time during the season when I'm like so best ball DFS focused. So it's just fun, and they all carry their own like sort of unique strategies to them.
Yeah, exactly. This is something actually I did want to bring up because I think you did focus a little bit on this, and I actually think a lot of the things that you were saying make a ton of sense around this concept. And I focus so much on the tournaments because, you're talking about DFS, like that's my background, right? As a DFS tournament player. So I'm kind of taking that and applying it to these best ball tournaments. Whereas like Nick brings up here, what, like, do you think, you talked about like printing money in best ball, and I totally agree with you, but would you like recommend the, kind of like what I would call a cash game, a best ball cash game, right? 3-man, 6-mans, even just like, concealed 10 or 12-man leagues. How would you like kind of, basically what would be your recommendation? Do you think people, just doing this, like drafting that you're talking about, can just destroy these 3-6-mans? Should you, would you focus more on tournaments? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, we just don't really have, I didn't see enough of a sample size to really spend too much time on that in my article. But yeah, if you're gonna, there's different contests, and again, your strategy changes a little bit. If it's just, the top 50% of the league profit, then go even more safety oriented. That drafting the third quarterback and the third tight end makes a little bit more sense there. Something along those lines, preserving yourself for injury risk. But yeah, I would stick to the typical 12-man. I just think there's enough of an edge there, and we have the sample size to know what is optimal and what isn't. And then if you're going to draft, sort of lottery ticket scratch off that is the millionaire maker for DraftKings, where the chances of you winning are very, very low.
Yeah.
Then like in that, definitely go for upside. So if you look at who would have won that Patrick Mahomes sophomore season, it would have been the guy who just went all in on Kansas City stacks. The data suggests that stacking is massively overrated in best ball, and I agree. Sort of counterintuitive, but just like the data is just like it's massively overrated. But in a something like that, all in on team stacks, okay. Like if you
Yeah.
think Jacksonville is going to be the Kansas City this year, like, okay, go all in on that, something like that. What I would do in something like that is I would draft like Javonte, Judy, Cortland, Fant, and Deshaun Watson, just because like
Okay.
how much does it cost? What is it, like a $20 entry?
Yeah.
Okay, if that happens, if you say Deshaun, no suspension, and we're trading you to Denver, the value of that team just went up from $20 to like
Yep.
$900. And
Yep.
it's just like a YOLO. Like my chances of winning were so low to begin with, but like that just gave me a big edge.
I really like that one too, because I like to the galaxy brain some stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like the people were doing it with Rodgers, right? Like, okay, what if Rodgers gets traded to the Broncos or whatever? I do think the Watson one is actually fairly interesting. You know, like you said, I wouldn't have 0. Let's just say that much. Even if I were, you know, if I were in 20, it'd be like, you know, I'm entering 20 into this millionaire maker. Like you said, I'm not going to win it. I'm not going to win it anyway. Let's be honest. It's 200,000 people, right? And it's top heavy, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, you know, there are these scenarios in these types of contests. Again, to your point about structuring your teams to fit the contest that you're playing in, right? I'm not drafting Deshaun Watson and 4 Broncos in my 12-man, you know, or my 3-man or my 6-man or whatever, you know, even in my best ball 10. Like I don't need to embrace that kind of risk. I actually want to do the polar opposite of that, you know. But in these contests, it's just like in DFS, right? I'm basically crafting some story, and it's probably a really low probability story that you know it's not going to happen. But if it happens, I'm gonna, you know, put myself in a perfect position to win this tournament. And I actually think, to your point, that's kind of like actually the premise of like modified 0 RB. Is like we have all this data that tells us like what happens at the running back position, both on your like Hines point and McKissick point, and on like the Christian McCaffrey, David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, right? We have this barbell that happens every single year at running back. There's a couple guys over here just dominating, and then there's all the rest of these dudes at the other end that pop up from the back end that give you enough that, you know, you can build this super team basically. And so it's really the exact same kind of approach that's been a lot of my, you know, 0 RB and modified 0 RB. So, you know, maybe it's just, I was excited to bring you on so I can have some confirmation bias about, you know, you like Antonio Gibson, you're bringing in NFL insiders that are saying Gibson is going to get more. Like, I think I perked up in my chair when you started talking about that. So I do want to talk a little bit about maybe some specific players. You've been drafting a little bit. Who's maybe some guys that you're just like super heavy on so far, whether you plan for it or not?
Yeah, so my guy throughout the entirety of the offseason has been Elijah Moore, which is sort of bittersweet. Like that was my guy. My model spit out, this is the 3rd best wide receiver in this class, but he's like not far behind Jamar Chase and Devonta Smith. And he's like one of the greatest or best prospects to come out in the past 7 years. The guy just set the record for yards from scrimmage per game. Any Division I wide receiver ever. Like he's probably really good. AJ Brown broke down into tears and said, "You're already better than I am at football." Like just all these different things. Model loved him. I loved his tape. Oh my God, his tape was freaking awesome. And he profiles as this. He averaged 10.8 receptions per game last year. He profiles as this sort of PPR cheat code who should be an immediate contributor for fantasy right off the bat. Said it in multiple articles, draft him wherever you can. And then the beat writers started chirping and sort of like blew this. So like he was my Exodia player. It's like what I call like my 4 or 5 circle your draft players, where like you just draft him, you log out because congratulations, you just won your league. And so we're losing the value on him a little bit, just like his ADP raises around, which is great because like, again, like best ball, you draft early. I'm in a bunch of these FFPC high stakes, you draft early. So like there's no prize for being on a guy early before your draft. Mm-hmm. So like, okay, at least I got him at really good value now that he's going in round 9,
Right.
something like that. So definitely recommend drafting early. At the wide receiver position, a little later than Elijah, I like Jacoby Myers. I just really like his upside. I'm also drafting Nelson Aguilar in case I'm wrong on him. He's the guy who's getting all the money, but I could see him, Jacoby Myers, in that Julian Edelman role.
Right.
And then ideally Mac Jones is the starting quarterback. So, having that role is a lot more valuable than it was last year. Like, here's a crazy stat. So after Julian Edelman went down, from week 7 on, when Jacoby Myers was the starting slot wide receiver, he ranked second among all wide receivers in yardage market share. It's just like insane. So if Cam Newton was anyone but Tim Tebow, and he was Tim Tebow last year, if he was anyone else, he would have been like a fantasy superstar. He ranked top 10 or top 15 in yards per route run, top 15 in PFF grade, ranked second best in percentage of targets where he was deemed open by PFF charters. And so I could just see that. I mean, the slot wide receiver in New England has been a money role for forever, and he's basically free in drafts. Mixon and Gibson are probably my 2 early round running backs I like quite a bit. There's some more late round running backs, but again, like in a start sit league, you try and steer clear of the dead zone. And then if we're talking best ball, there's, it's a different story with like who you're going to target. You're not going to target the guys who have that, like domination, whatever you called it, legendary upside.
Yeah.
You're going to target, more like the safer guys.
Right.
Tight end, Logan Thomas. And he's been my guy all offseason. Confirmation from our insider that he looks amazing. He looks like even better than he did last year. And the tight end coach was saying he thought he was a top 5 or top 7 tight end last year. And then quarterback's fairly easy for me. I have that down to Jalen Hurts, number 1 target. Trey Lance, number 2 target.
Oh, yeah.
Number 3 target is both Saints quarterbacks in the last rounds of your draft. And then Deshaun Watson, probably number 4. Justin Fields is close in there too.
I love it. So my biggest takeaway from like basically every name that you listed was so perfect, because how I like to think about it is every player has basically like a certain level of risk, and they have a certain like payoff, right? And there's probably, what's actually going to happen is probably somewhere in between, but like the balance between those two things creates a certain level of loss he provides your lineup and an upside, right? And so especially in best ball, like you were talking about, yes, I want the league winners, but I also want to make bets that don't kill me, right? Like last year, you pointed out Mecole Hardman in your article, and is the perfect example. Like, was there a payoff on Mecole Hardman? Sure, of course. There was a scenario in which he actually became a starter and, earned a certain level of targets, blah, blah, blah. It's like breakout, etc. But like at the cost that he was going at, there was a huge risk of ruin. Like he could, he ended up being the worst pick at that, relative tier. So I want to be targeting the guys like you mentioned. Cole Beasley was a perfect example, but I think there's a ton of guys. Jacoby Myers always does actually pop to my head for that example. It's like we have a whole lot of evidence that he's a good football player and can earn targets at a pretty incredible level. Even if some of all that regresses at his cost, there's like no risk. There's like what could he possibly do to really burn you as a 15th round pick or whatever it is? But there's a ton of, if he's Julian Edelman or better, like the payoff is absolutely massive. And so I thought it was really funny because basically every player that you named was like, yeah, outside of running backs, because they always have a certain level of risk. It's like all those guys, running quarterbacks or cheap quarterbacks with upside, these wide receivers that have either a ton of talent or a fairly stable, role with upside. It's like I just give me 18 or 20 of those dudes across my team, and it's like you said. Then I'm drafting structurally correct. It's like you almost can't lose.
Yeah, and so again, in a start sit league, you have to be drafting for upside. Like risk is wholly irrelevant. And after round 6, round 7, only draft for upside and draft for nothing else, because there is no risk of ruin. You always have the safety net of the waiver wire to fall back on. But in a best ball league, you don't have that, which is why safety, there's now a premium on safety that wasn't there in start sit league. So like, that's what's so valuable. Really recommend reading that article, Upside Wins Championships. But yeah, and so like, so much of my player analysis is just not worrying too much about downside. It's just like, I want those, like if Jacoby Myers is a top 15 wide receiver at the price tag of wide receiver 80, that is so valuable. That's like, I could whiff horrendously on my round 6, 7, 8, and 9 picks, and that more than makes up for it in round 18. It's something along those lines.
Right. If you find, it's like last year, right? In a managed league, if you find Justin Jefferson, you have, okay, I just found, the wide receiver, whatever, in the 16th round. Like you said, there's multiple, I only have to start so many guys. And so, okay, I had some other misses, but I found the 3 league winners. Yeah. Those misses don't even matter. Like you said, I can drop them or put them on my bench because now I found the winner. And so giving yourself as many shots on goal at those league winners is perfect. And I actually think, that's why I brought up like the payoff versus risk thing, because in these, like in the Millie Maker type thing, like to your Deshaun Watson example, right, to your Broncos example, like I don't know what the probability that those guys hit that ceiling, but there is a very clear there's a ceiling on the Broncos probably, even if Teddy or Lock, but maybe not all of them together, but there's probably a ceiling on those guys a little bit. And then, like you said, the Deshaun Watson example, or I mean, who the hell knows what happens? Like they basically don't have an NFL starting quarterback. Who knows, right? Philly won't even name Jalen Hurts. Like they're like, playing coy about Jalen Hurts. Like we don't know what the hell is gonna happen. So that was what I was gonna press you on next. Is you like Deshaun Watson and you like Jalen Hurts? Are you spooked at all on Jalen Hurts? Are you leaning a little more to like Watson with the Eagles? What's your thoughts on that situation?
Yeah, again, in a best ball, I'm not going to like Jalen Hurts as much as I love him in start sit. I don't know that he's good at football. I don't know. I think he is. I really do think he is. But there's a chance he's not. There's a chance he loses the starting job. There's a chance he trade for Deshaun Watson. All I know is that when he's on the field, he's almost guaranteed to be a mid-range QB1 or better for fantasy. And like, that's all I care about. So in a start sit league, what will I be doing? I'll be drafting Jalen Hurts, and then I'll also draft a competent QB2. Oftentimes that's been Watson because he's basically free. Right. What's his upside? It's Deshaun Watson. It's top 6 production. So like, and most likely landing spot is Philly. Okay, great. So like, I just covered my bases there and have sky high upside with 2 picks. Trey Lance has been my number 2 quarterback. So what will I do there? It's like, I need a guy I know can start week 1. It won't be Deshaun Watson. I won't pair Trey Lance with Deshaun Watson, but it'll be someone else. And then the fact that you could get the Saints quarterback for basically for free, you just got to use 2 picks on it. Absolutely love that as a floor. And so in a start sit league, what's your floor with the quarterback position? It's basically guaranteed to be mid to low end QB1 levels of production, because something like there's only going to be 15 rostered quarterbacks at any given time, which gives you 18 to stream from. You're going to get low end QB1 production on streaming alone, or you could pick up a Ryan Tannehill or Justin Herbert off waivers. Those guys went undrafted in the majority of leagues last year. So at the quarterback position in a start sit league, you have to chase upside. It's and why wouldn't you? Again, your floor is low end QB1. So chase upside. And that's exactly what I'm doing. As much as I love the big 5 Konami code quarterbacks this year, and I feel great about it. I just see all this value elsewhere later in the draft that it still makes sense for me to go late round QB in a start sit. Not best ball, but in a start sit, it makes sense to go late round QB, chase upside. And again, it's a onesie position. It matters significantly less than running back, which matters far and away the most. Matters more than wide receiver, which matters second most, but significantly less than running back. Matters more than less than tight end. So in a QB league, typically chasing those guys in that order, in that specific pairing, and then late round QB typically. Yeah.
What do you think about those rookie quarterbacks? And Hurts goes a little bit ahead of those guys, but people don't need to hear me talk about Trey Lance anymore. He's my highest owned player not owned player, but highest owned quarterback, definitely across all of best ball. I couldn't possibly be more, bullish on Lance. And every day, the Twitter machine likes to pump out more Trey Lance hype from camp, which is just it's so easy to continue this Trey Lance bit. I only have to just use the rocket emoji every day on one of the million positive reports about Lance. But I'm almost basing my strategy around like my going into a draft when you love Jalen Hurts or you love Trey Lance. It allows you to kind of map out your strategy a little bit, knowing where they go and what you have to do to take those kind of guys. But do you have any similar sort of feelings for the other rookies? Do you see that kind of upside that you're looking for in Lawrence, Fields, even like Zach Wilson or anything like that?
Yeah, those beat writers are killing me this year. So in that article, which came out 3 or 4 weeks ago, I compared Jalen Hurts to Lamar Jackson, his sophomore season, who at the time I had multiple MVP bets on. I said he was far and away the best value you can make in any draft at any position was Lamar Jackson, his breakout year. So I don't throw that comp around lightly. But then I also said Trey Lance reminds me a lot of sophomore year Patrick Mahomes, just like the perfect landing spot. Yeah. 3 of the best yards after the catch monsters we've ever seen, massive Konami code upside. And so those 2 guys have a lot of them on the same team, have heavy exposure to both guys, really like them quite a bit. In that article, I also brought up how Bovada had it at the time 25% that Trey Lance is going to start week 1. I had it like 55%. Now you have to feel like I threw out the Mahomes comp. Benjamin Albright, who's very, very tuned in, said that's what San Francisco brass has told him, Patrick Mahomes 2.0. Now it's looking like he's going to start week 1 or not, if not week 1, very soon. And so you love that. You feel good about that. The other rookies, I'm not really too interested in Trevor Lawrence. I'm not too interested in Zach Wilson or Mac Jones. It's just, again, upside rules the day in starts. At least I question the upside. Justin Fields has that upside. He ran the 3rd fastest ever 40-yard dash. I think 3rd best ever speed score, which is like a weight adjusted 40-yard dash. So he has that Konami code upside. My concern is Chicago just continuing to be the donkeys they've shown us to be. We've said multiple times that you want to take the Mahomes approach, which is just like sit him for the full year. And so like that everyone's just like, come on, Andy Dalton stinks. Like, what do you, it's just like the assumption of rational coaching is like one of the biggest mistakes we continually make as fantasy experts. And like, especially with guys who have only ever shown us their donkeys. So it's like, I don't know, that just makes me nervous. I think Trey Lance is better. I think he has more upside. I think he's better for fantasy. I think he's in a better situation. I think his coaching staff is smarter. I trust them more to start him early. But no, I do like Fields. That is,
I like, I think we all know like the assumption of rational coaching thing, but it's like, Charlie Brown with the football, we come in every offseason, like everybody gets it. Like, stop trusting these idiots, right? Jason Garrett's out here. Like, there's a new report every day about some donkey thing that Jason Garrett is doing. And then every year we're like, like expecting something to change, but we have to, there's a certain bar once a coach reach, right? And the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan has jumped over that bar that we need, to understand, okay, we can trust this guy, right? We can trust this guy to have efficient offenses. We can trust this guy to watch practice and see like, this Lance kid looks a little bit better than Jimmy G, like we can trust him, but like Matt Nagy has never ever earned that trust. So I really like that point. And you're getting me more excited about Hurts. And I think That's another trap maybe sometimes that people fall into, is like, he's plummeted. His ADP is absolutely, you'll love it. That's the one thing the beat reporters are not killing us, are not killing you on. Elijah Moore, I was joking on a show not that long ago that you made the point about drafting early, and I totally agree. So like, I have some like 12th round Darrell Henderson teams with like 16th round Elijah Moore on them, not many, but it's like, that's why you draft early, right? Is you run into those things. And so we're getting the opposite effect on Jalen Hurts, and it was already starting to intrigue me. So now I'm really intrigued by, kind of the things that you were saying, just in terms of his overall upside, because everyone is so scared because of the Deshaun Watson news. And your point, like on managed leagues especially, is like, who gives a shit? Like, who gives a shit about Deshaun Watson? Like, hey, you can draft Deshaun Watson or pick him up, if he does happen to get traded there. And if he doesn't, like, you're golden with Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. So who do you think the best DFS player in the game is right now?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Probably Awesemo.
Okay. So with best ball, the best ball player is like, you wouldn't even think about that. Probably Awesemo. It's like, definitely Aaron H., who's just like a legend of a whale, who every single year posts the highest win rates at the highest volume. Yeah. Just absolutely cleans up and dominates. And so he helped me quite a bit with this article. I was talking to him and really, really hammered down that the best time to draft is as early as possible, or August. Like, your highest win rate is going to be August, because that's when all the fish come out to play. Yep. But as early as possible is when you get, like, when Javonte, Najee, and Etienne were all going in like round 7, round 8. It's when Elijah was going undrafted. He went undrafted up until the NFL draft. I timed out and all my teams suck, but they all had Elijah on them. I think they all had Rondale Moore too. And so, like, that is a great time to draft. And I don't know, plug for our site, fantasypoints.com. We're heavy into the dynasty stuff real early into the offseason. So you guys knew early on that Elijah was my guy. Kyle Pitts is a future Hall of Famer, all that stuff. So definitely with best ball, try and get out early before the NFL draft. And then you're just going to see like all the rookies you rostered, their ADP explodes. Yeah. Without fail, every single season, it's the same thing.
Yeah, this was a beautiful show for my confirmation bias, because that was I think it was the first article I wrote this offseason, was that, like, I spent the time trying to think about that approach, like, when to draft, and like, I get 150 bullets into these contests, right? I'm trying to max like Best Ball Mania 2, for example, on Underdog. Like, I get 150 bullets and I have like 5 months to do it. When is the right time, to map out those? I don't want to just continually do it throughout the off season because I'm being lazy about it. And so I basically came to that exact same conclusion. Like, I want to draft as like basically half. I decided I ended up doing a lot more than half early, actually, but like half early to get exactly like what you said. I'm going to maximize. You're going to have misses, right? Whether you time out like you did, or whether, you just are on the wrong 18th round pick, whatever. You're going to have misses. You're going to have guys get injured, but you're also going to have some superstar squads, right? With 18th round Elijah Moore, with Darrell Henderson, with things that, people just weren't hip to yet at that point in the offseason. And then you come back at the end, right? Like you said, and now we have to draft Elijah Moore in the 9th round, and that sucks, but we have a skill advantage over these other people, so then you just like draft structurally sound, continue to draft the right kinds of players, and you draft structurally sound, and you kind of get the best of both worlds. So like I said, this was beautiful confirmation bias for me, bringing you on. And I actually think you can, like we talked about it a little bit, just how much you can learn from thinking about these different contests in their silo, but also like we talked a lot about best ball, but we also talked a lot about managed. Like you mentioned Dynasty. I actually think Dynasty might be the most powerful way to think about other formats. Like if you're good, I'm not a Dynasty expert. You guys are, but I like to listen to people like you talk about Dynasty, because it's like, okay, if Elijah Moore is really an awesome Dynasty asset, then like, why do I not just want him on my best ball teams? Why do I not just want him on my redraft team? So that's the thing I was going to like close with is, do you think, there's some dynasty takeaways that can help like best ball players?
Yeah. So you'll talk to like, you'll listen to NFL GMs say how they really like multi-sport athletes. You'll talk about like directors of scouting at big college programs talk about how they like multi-sport athletes. I think Josh Allen just talked about it in a recent interview with The Ringer, where he said he played every single sport growing up, and that helped him more play the quarterback position, helped him more than if he had just only played quarterback, had the right quarterback guru from when he was age 10 and up. And so it's just like you learn spatial awareness playing basketball, playing hockey, you learn this, playing soccer, you learn that. And it all comes together to help you play football or to help him play football. And so I think the same thing is true for the typical fantasy player. I think the more you do, the better you're going to get at everything. You have to be careful. Like I was talking about before, you go all in on best ball and then your start sit teams don't have enough upside, or you go all in on dynasty and you draft too many, underperforming rookies. Like you have to worry about that. Mm-hmm. But I think, eventually it's all going to come together and make you so much smarter. So in a dynasty, like, who all the potential rookie breakouts are before the NFL draft. In a best ball, you have a better understanding of safety versus upside versus risk, whatever. In a DFS, and so like this is like a big thing for me. So like I'm gonna have very little exposure to Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor. I freaking love those guys. Jonathan Taylor, I wrote tomes how much I loved him for Dynasty last year. What stinks with them is, and I like them in best ball. They're great for best ball, whatever. But I typically predominantly play start sit. Mm-hmm. And so they're less valuable because in games Tennessee loses, Derrick Henry averages 11.3 fantasy points per game. So what do? I get my Derrick Henry exposure in DFS.
Yeah.
In games Tennessee is heavily favored. And so like I'm going to get trashed if, let's say, Tennessee wins 14 games this year and Derrick Henry finishes top 5. My mentions are going to be in flames. I'm going to get trashed. People are going to call me an idiot. Okay, I didn't have him in start sit. I had him in best ball. I had a ton of him in DFS.
Yep.
And so I love fantasy. I love all the different types of fantasy, and it allows me to like not be like I can play every single player, and like I'll play them in the formats that they're best, which is DFS for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and I think to like the dynasty point, or just all the formats, DFS is the one where like you said, the Derrick Henry thing is a great example. There's a ton of them, but you draw these conclusions. Like I do like to take a step back and be like, okay, when I'm making a DFS lineup for that week, right? I'm sitting on Sunday morning and trying to make that final decision on like, do I play this chalky player? What stack do I play or whatever? And a lot of the methodology that you're using to think about how, like who to play and whatnot in DFS, just like the methodology you're using, like who to target in Dynasty, like I can take a lot of that and apply it to best ball, or apply it to managed. And like you said, I have to be able to know how to combine it, right? And not go too far pulling these things from the different formats when they don't apply, right? But my favorite example is always like, I don't feel like this insert X chalk player in DFS, he can't burn me, right? Like everybody's going to play this guy, but I just don't believe that he can like bury me. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, I'm not going to, he doesn't have the upside to bear. Like I get, he projects well, whatever, but he can't like, I'm not gonna, at 6 p.m. on Sunday evening, I'm not going to look back like, damn, I lost because I didn't have Russell Gage, right? And so like, I try to take that, I'm not using that entirely in best ball because like you said, there's different aspects to safety, upside, roster construction, but that I am kind of using that methodology. Like I'm not drafting X player in the 6th because I just don't foresee a path where he ever puts up a season that I give a shit about, and like not having him. And so taking these different approaches, right, has actually been super valuable to me. So to your point, I'm going to continue to try to pump these people. Like, I want to try to get in some more dynasty leagues. I want to get in some more, managed leagues or whatever, because I do think there's a lot of valuable lessons that you can learn. So we're closing in on about an hour. I really, really appreciate you coming on, and this conversation was awesome. And maybe we can do it again closer to the season. Is there anything you talked about? Did you just drop that article that you were mentioning, or do you have something else coming up? I can't remember what you said.
Yeah, so I wrote this article last year, and then I redid it this year. It's Upside Wins Championships. Check that out. It's free. You don't need a subscription for that. If you like that, you could read all the follow-up pieces, which is different players who have underrated upside that I like. You should have read it a couple of weeks ago before the beat writers gave everyone away. But definitely check that out. And then My Guys is my next article. It just has my rankings of quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, how I target each position and why. Like I said, I lean more towards late round quarterback for here's why, and here's the historical win rates that back that up. And here's my circle your draft players like Elijah Moore and some other guys I wouldn't give away on the show. So definitely check out My Guys. If you want to subscribe to fantasypoints.com, use promo code 21Barrett10. And thanks for having me on, Erik. It was honestly a blast, and I would like to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely get something a little bit closer to the season, when Elijah Moore's going in like the 6th round, and Deshaun Watson's on the Eagles, and then we can kind of follow up to all this conversation. But yeah, my quick housekeeping is just everybody make sure to go to spikeweek.com, sign up for the Discord. We're having some, you know this, doing everything that you have to do at Fantasy Points. There's always hurdles that come about when like trying to launch a site or whatever. So we're working as fast as we can to get spikeweek.com up and running. But the Discord is totally up and running and totally free. So I just recommend that everybody go there, and hopefully over the next day or two or something very shortly, we'll have the website up and running. But until then, I will talk to you guys later, and enjoy your weekend.